Hello guys, welcome to the first tutorial video on Spline Design Studio's YouTube channel. As I talked about in the other channel update, my personal channel is going away as far as sim racing and 3ds Max content, which is what most people are on that channel for. All of that content will be posted on this Spline Design Studios channel. I want to thank everybody for coming over here, and new subscribers, welcome. This video is going to touch on a follow-up to a video posted on the other channel, which was making high-resolution satellite images. Hopefully that video will get copied over here onto this channel as well, so they'll both be over here, but I'll link to that in the description, so you can find that. How to get started on making these high resolution images. So here we have Indianapolis, and I'll talk about what's down here in the corner in a little bit. The stitched together image you can see is just overlapping. Obviously, I talked about that in the previous video. Now what do you do with this information after you get this stitched together? You have a couple of options. If you're working on NASCAR 2003, you may want to go ahead and get that in Sandbox. You can see here's a scratch-built Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Already has the satellite image behind it. It's already been sized. How did I go from Photoshop to getting it in here? We'll go over that real quick here. So I want to save that as a BMP, 24-bit BMP file. Then I'm going to open Windmill 2. I'm going to open that image. You can see it's 48 megabytes. Now this is going to take a while. My system's pretty stout. It's got 32 gigabytes of RAM. If you've got less than that, this is something that you're not just going to click and be done. This program is kind of buggy, especially with these big file sizes. You can see how big that is on the image. Like it's very, very large. One thing that is frustrating about WinMap is when I change types over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is change that to a MIP, and you can see it automatically bumped back over away from the edge. So now I have to find it again. It's kind of annoying with these big images. You usually don't have that problem with the little ones, but type 10 is fine. Map 3, we're not going to repeat the image. It's not necessary. This isn't going on an object. It's not a texture for an object. It's actually a background image, but it has to be a MIP. Some images really doesn't make any difference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now when I click save, the WinMap 2 is going to look like it's frozen, and I'm going to do this live because I want you to see. As soon as I hit save, I take my hand off the mouse and I don't touch it again until WinMap comes back from looking like it's crashed. So I'm going to hit save, and in this case I have to hit overwrite. I'm going to hit yes. I'm not going to click, I'm not going to do anything until that icon turns back into a mouse and it's done processing. And can't see it on my desktop, but I just saw a temp file disappear, and I believe we're good to go. Yes, we're good to go. So if you've got a slower computer system, that might take you up to 2 minutes. So especially with these high resolution images. Alright, so now we have the MIP file right there on the desktop. I'm going to take and copy that over. In this case I don't need to. I've got the wrong information on this little thing here, and I'll talk about that briefly so I don't forget. It's actually -30. If I go to adjust background image, it's actually -30. The one I just created fixes that. It's something that I skipped over and didn't even notice. The reason I copied that on there is in case I change the name of the track folder or something like that and the Sandbox settings get lost, I will still have the information that's in here on the image itself, so I can just copy the information from here back onto here. Obviously that doesn't work if you have the wrong information on there, but that's been corrected, so right now we'll just kind of ignore that. How do I get those numbers? That's what we're going to talk about. So obviously when you start out, you're not going to have any background image. I don't know if it'll let me. I don't think it will let me change it now, but if I hit 9, okay, yeah, it does. Okay, it will. If I want to go ahead and put that back on there, it was Indianapolis ground HD. What you name it really makes no difference. When you select the background image, it's adjust background image, in case I'm doing that too fast. I'll do it again. Adjust background image. Select the image that you just copied over, and what I'm talking about by copying over is I'm going to the editing folder. I'm going here, and I'm actually copying that image into the folder there, that MIP file. So just drag and drop that in there. So once it's in the folder, you may have to reload Sandbox when you do that, by the way. May not update the list. Select your MIP file. It's going to be, this column will be all zeros. This column will be 500 by 500. How do I get it to the correct size? Well, what you want to do is you want to have Google Earth open. Make sure you can see that there. We're going to use the linear guide or the ruler. I work in meters, work in whatever is comfortable with you. I can tell you that meters works out better in Sandbox and Papyrus stuff. I briefly talked about that by, find a wide point to wide point there. In this case, 1549. Now, what I'm going to do is, when you first do that, your image is going to be 500 by 500 in the center here. I'll just go ahead and make it just so you can see what it looks like. I've got all this information saved, so there's no... So you're going to start out with something that looks like that if you're working on a Papyrus track. The other thing, if you're not familiar with Sandbox all that well, you may end up looking at something like this, or, with the track visible. If I want to be able to see just the outlines without the textures, then I can do View. That's up here, View. Draw a world underneath. Now I get this see-through CAD-like drawing. To start with, I typically start moving that image out of the way, and it's as simple as trying random numbers. We'll start with 500. In this case, I'm going to go 2000. I'm hitting C to center, Z to zoom just a little bit. Before I get zoomed in over there, I'm going to zoom back out so I can see both of them. This will work whether you're doing a scratch-built track or a Papyrus track. If you're doing a scratch-built track, you need to have a track folder set up. You need to have a center line set up to be able to add this image to it. It needs to know that it's working out of a directory before you can see that. I think in most cases I always start with the Papyrus track and then literally delete the entire track so that Sandbox knows that I'm working in that folder. There may be other ways to do that. That way I'm doing it may be unnecessary, but it works obviously. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on linear guide, which brings up this little square in the center of the racetrack over here. If I click on that and drag out, it brings out the linear guide. You notice it's telling you that between the two endpoints is 403.81 meters. So I can grab the endpoints and move the endpoints. If I grab the center point, it moves the whole thing locked in place. Kind of see where I'm going with this. I've got a measurement of 1549.80 for the width of the track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my linear guide to 1549.80. That's close enough to 1550 that I'm just going to make it 1550. So I can hit Z or C to zoom into that, Z to zoom into it, and then 15. Working with the linear guide, I'm going to center it. I'm going to hit Z. Can't really see anything happening there, but I zoomed in. When I zoomed in, the more I zoom in, the more precise those numbers will get. Zooming in more. You can see I can get exactly, if I wanted to set it at what I measured, that's fine. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that over roughly where the center is. And now I'm just going to adjust the width. 1500, I need to go more than that. And forgot my measurements already. I ended up at 2140, but I want you to understand the process of how I got to 2140. So that's not wide enough, so let me try 2000. Recenter that. You know, you can adjust roughly the other one to make it a little more square so you get more of a racetrack shape. So just to cut down on, you know, the process of doing that, I'll go ahead and put in the final number, but that's how you would sneak up on it, is you would take guesses as, okay, the next guess would be 2100. Needs to be a little bit more. Maybe 2200. A little bit too much. 2150. Closer, still a little bit less. 2140. Close enough. Alright, so that's how I got to that process. Then you would repeat that same exact process doing the vertical measurement. And you would pick a point, you know, wherever. You do the same thing. In this case, this ended up being a square, 2140. If I go there to there, I got 746. I'm going to angle a little bit, so you have to kind of watch that. 745. The more you zoom in, the linear guide works pretty much the same, by the way. You can't grab the center point, you can only grab the end points on this guide here. 748 and 745. If you zoom way in, you can get it a lot more precise. Obviously, the more you zoom in, the more precise it gets. Talked about that. I think that pretty much, you know, explains that process of how do I get the background image sized correctly. Now this image is sized correctly. It's a good idea to pick random things like how long is the garage or something like that. Just pick an object in the track. That way, you know, if you build this object in 3ds Max or something, I think that's a shadow there. So maybe this isn't the best example, but I've got 106 meters. What is that in Earth here? It is 105.86, so you can get pretty darn close. The more you zoom in, the more precise you can get with that. Like I said, I didn't get 100% perfect on this. Try not to spend too much time on it. I don't want to make this video too long, but you understand the process of how do I get the image sized in Sandbox. Hopefully that makes more sense. Now, the image is over here floating, and you typically want it over here closer to the racetrack. In this case, it is, and it's very similar as far as that process goes. Right now I've got it at, what is it, 115 negative 30 is where it should be. 115 just 30. How would you get to that point on an existing papyrus track? what I will do is, I'm not going to save that. What I'm going to do is actually show you that and why some of the racetracks have been rebuilt. I'm pretty sure I've got the original Indianapolis in here. So I'll let that load up. If I go ahead and put that image in there, the exact same size, so it's 115, negative 30, 2140, 2140. So that is sized, accurately. Don't pay so much attention to the actual measurements in this case. What you're going to have to pay attention to is what you came up with. In this case, that's off. So I think I came up with negative 19. Puts that where that should be on the start-finish line. Hopefully it shows up in the video. This is the start-finish line, and if I go to draw world underneath, you can kind of make that out a little bit easier probably for the video. Turn the world off. That's the walls lined up with the wall. Pit road's lined up, so the width of the track over here is actually pretty good. Pit road starts to get a little bit off. Zoom out and go over here. You can see that right there, where that box is actually the wall. That is where it should be. So you start to see that the papyrus tracks are quite a bit off, actually. So you have to make a decision on whether are you rebuilding the racetrack from scratch to make it accurate, or are you going to resize your image to match the existing track as closely as possible, and just being okay with the fact that the base geometry is wrong. So that's a decision that you have to make. I had to make that decision. I decided to remake the track from scratch and make it accurate as I could possibly make it. I've heard some talk about Google Earth not being accurate and that you should use iRacing images. I don't currently have iRacing installed. I ended up using that method for Bristol because the iRacing image ended up being cleaner than the satellite image. You don't always get the benefit of having a clean satellite image. This one's fairly clean, everything's well defined, there's no warping, straight lines are straight, that kind of thing. The iRacing image, the only issue with doing that is you're looking at a perspective image versus an orthographic image, meaning it's multiple cameras combined into one, or multiple perspectives trying to simulate what your eyes see. If you close one eye, you get a different view on the world than you do with both eyes open and stuff like that. When you're talking about laying down lines, you need a single perspective. So that's more 3ds Max than what we're talking about here. How would I resize this image? I would have to make the image fit the track. So this is the papyrus track. So what I would do is it's too wide vertically. So I would decrease this until I could line the walls up. You're going to have to play around with it. You're going to have to recenter it. So if I make an adjustment that way, then I'd have to change this to a little bit less. And, well, actually that was the wrong one. 15. Basically get your walls lined up roughly where they need to be. It's also a little bit too wide width-wise. Try to get your start-finish line lined up. And what you're doing is making the satellite image match something that is incorrect, which is Papyrus's geometry. If you're doing it that way, you're going to have to make sure that you get that information into 3ds Max, because if I build, if I rebuild this grandstand or something, or they build a new grandstand that's different or whatever, and I build that in the method that we're going to talk about in 3ds Max. I got to put it in this track. It's going to be the wrong scale because I rescaled this image to match the existing geometry. So kind of see why I lean towards I would rather rebuild the track and know the track is correct than whatever I build is going to sit there and look appropriately scaled because everything is the same scale, which is real. So I think that's all I need to cover on Sandbox. If I skipped over anything, put it in the comments. I'll try to answer that. Talked about how to get the satellite image together, how to get it in Sandbox, how to get it sized correctly, and how to size it to an existing track that may be incorrect. And it's literally just clicking adjust, making adjustments, making sure that the start finish line is lined up where it's supposed to be, making sure that most of the corners are lined up. I can tell you from experience that the road courses, you might as well forget it. It's not going to happen. Both road courses that Papyrus did, the Infineon or Sears Point or whatever they called it at the time, and Watkins Glen, nowhere near accurate as far as this method. Getting the satellite image in there, all that stuff will work fine, but it's not even close. So I think I'm going to leave the Sandbox part there. I think that's all we need to cover on that. I'm going to talk a little bit quickly here about how to do something similar in 3ds Max if I wanted to build a building or a grandstand or whatever, and I want to use that same image. How would I get this into 3ds Max? I kind of talked about it a little bit. I'm going to draw a plane. I'm going to turn the grid off, by the way. The other thing I'm going to talk about real quick, I haven't mentioned this in any videos for a little while, but make sure you're set up on meters, metric, and your system unit scale is 1 meter. Make sure that that is all matching there. So I'm going to create a plane. I just need one segment on each axis there. Center that plane. I'm going to apply, let's see, standard, diffuse map, bitmap, and make sure it's there. Okay, so drag and drop that on there. Alright. Convert that to editable poly. Apply unwrap to it. Make sure this is mapped correctly. Make sure we're in polygon mode. I'll try to flatten map it just to see if it didn't really work that well. Alright, so I'm going to just make that 1 to raise it all the way to the top. Just right clicking to make that 0. So the bottom 0 and the left is 0. And then obviously that's 1 vertical and 1 horizontal. And looks like it's looking at it from this direction. That's fine. So I go ahead and close the mapping, convert that back to a poly. Now, how do I get that plane sized accurately? So I'm going to do the same thing that I did in here, which was, obviously you want to spend a little more time with this than what I'm doing. About 1546 sounds right to me. So I have a measurement. There's really no linear guide. There's measurement tools in here. I prefer to do it this way. So what I'm going to do is set that up as 1546.82. And we'll make it about 20 meters tall. And what I'm going to do is angle snap it. 90 degrees, so it's standing vertically. I'm also going to change to orthographic view. See how the view changed a little bit. I'll go over why that's important a little bit here in just a second, but right now I'm going to uniform scale it. Doing something very similar, and something that also might help a little bit is if you go edge faces. So you can see those edges a little bit. We're also getting into a scale where I need this to be taller. So I'm just going to scale that up so it's easier to see it. And it's basically the same process of lining that up, that known measurement up with this. A little bit off. Very, very close. The more time you spend on that, the more accurate everything is going to be. You do the same thing the other direction, make another plane, the known measurement that direction, rotate it 90 degrees. You can make it different colors so it's easier to see. You know, after you appropriately size that plane, then you can build your object right on top of it. Obviously this is still squished because I haven't done the other axis, so I'm going to cut this video off here pretty soon, but you can see how where you would doing that would give you an accurate size building and give you an accurate size track using the same satellite image that we talked about in the other video. So hopefully that, without too much rambling there, gives you the idea of how you would get that set up. If I need to make any other videos, just put them in the comments as far as requests and things like that. So I think I covered everything I need to cover in this. Kind of rambled a little bit, but any other questions, comments, leave them in the comments. And with that, thanks for watching.